We're doing okay. I'm George Bai, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. We're going to talk about some technical things, some exciting things we believe are going to reshape general aviation in part, and unmanned aerial systems and the potential of what all that might be. But one of the things that we want to do as a company is help address the culture of what we're doing in the transportation sector and how it might impact us as a country, as a world. And so speaking to groups like this is something that's important to us. We want to get the message out. So in kind of keeping with that, I really want to welcome and invite you to ask questions as we go. I know we have a Q&A at the end, and we'll try to keep most of them towards the end, but if there's something I'm talking about tonight that you just got to ooh, you know, please feel free to interrupt, and we'll try to address it, maybe you know, make a note to bring that up in the Q&A time. I'm an engineer by training, a pilot as well. I was an Air Force pilot, went to Desert Storm, Raytheon after that for a while, through flight safety for T6 JPATs. I've been kind of in that whole military defense area for some years. We did the Javelin project. Some of you may know of me and the Javelin. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, we talked about the electric Cessna project, and we're here today to kind of go to where we are now and what the potential holds for the future. Who was here? Was anybody here when we spoke a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago? So there's 3 or 4 of us. In terms of the audience, how many of us are engineers or technically oriented? Is there anybody that's just like, man, if you say watts or watt hours per kilogram, you're just way over my head? Are we? There's an honest answer. How about media? Do we have media here tonight? Anybody that's associated with a newspaper or any kind of media? Okay, I will do my best to try to slow down when I get into technical things, but again, raise your hand if there's a little bit of explanation needed. But what we're here to talk about tonight is the persistence of flight that's possible with the kind of the 4 main technologies, and it's a continuation from the theme that we had with the electric Cessna project a couple years ago. What you're looking at here is a prototype of what we call the STRATOAIRNET. You can see the top of the wing has a kind of a blue surface to it. Those are solar panels. You can see there's no intake as you would typically see with a conventional engine. Of course, that's not needed because the airplane's not consuming oxygen. It's battery and electric motor propelled. You can see it's got a long wing, and the construction underneath the wing is composite. So we've got a very light, advanced structural material, a very aerodynamic, sleek airplane that instead of running on conventional fuel with an internal combustion engine is using the very latest in electric motor technology. And there's a little bit more underneath there too. But that's what we're going to talk about tonight. What's happening with propulsion? What's the potential with propulsion on an airplane, whether it's manned or unmanned, in fact. Next slide. So prior to the electric Cessna project, when we started Bai Aerospace, we started with the concept of utilizing solar, battery technology, electric motors in a smaller scale, unmanned. And the Silent Falcon is the result. 13-foot wingspan, weighs about 25 pounds. A little airplane of this size typically would fly for an hour or two and have a small camera underneath to take pictures for mapping or wildlife. You know, in Alaska, it was just announced that UAS has now had the FAA permission to work with BP, I think, right? Up in Alaska. Yes, sir.
I was just seeing on the internet too that the FAA has granted permission for certain movies to be filmed commercially with
quadcopters and octocopters and things like that. You know, what's interesting about that, that's really cool. And that's you know, we're looking to the future about how we can utilize airspace for these various types of research or security or whatever it might be. But imagine instead of having an hour and a half or 2 hours of flight endurance with a Puma from AeroVironment, which is a great company, imagine having 8 to 12 hours of endurance with a same-sized airplane. And that's possible because of the solar collection on the top of the wings and the advanced high energy density batteries and the little very, very efficient electric motor. Next slide. We won't talk about this very much tonight, but we're also looking at manned aircraft. And again, kind of the continuation of the Cessna project into carrying people. But of course, when you carry people relative to electronics tend to weigh a fair amount. So if you're trading weight and performance, an aircraft like this is, you know, 3, 4, maybe 5 hour type of endurance rather than potentially perpetual flight. Next slide. So, I'm going to do my best tonight to tell you what's real today. I'm going to look into the future and talk about where we're going. And of course, whenever you look into the future, when you're future casting, we're not making promises, we're projecting. We're talking about what's possible, what the trends are, not what reality is. So where we are today, we're unveiling a technology demonstrator literally within a matter of weeks. Where we go with that tomorrow, I think, is unbelievable, truly fantastic. But just as a reminder, we'll try to distinctly differentiate between today and tomorrow. Okay? So, if you look at the slide here, you see Silent Falcon. You see the research that we've done with Navy and with Cessna on that electric Cessna project, which flew some 25 times, by the way. Remember, for those that were here, Charlie Johnson was up here doing the presentation with me, the former Cessna president and COO. He's with us today still. And we flew that electric Cessna, tremendous research and development project. But that's leading us to where we are today with a purpose-built aircraft, unmanned and manned. And there you see a picture in the center, the yellow aircraft. Again, you can see the solar thin film photovoltaics on the top of the wing. That's the Electra 1, and we're working with a company in Germany called PC Aero that we met years ago. But that's a purpose-built electric airplane, and you'll notice it's quite a bit different than a Cessna. It's quite a bit different than a Predator UAV. You notice the nose is very, very skinny. The electric motor, we'll see here in a minute, is quite small. It's about the size of a watermelon. Very, very light, purpose-built. And that's taking us to the future. That base aircraft is taking us to the future with unmanned and manned systems. This is the airplane that we'll be seeing here in Colorado literally in a matter of weeks. So as I mentioned, we need the aerodynamics, and we need the opportunity for the aerodynamics to contribute to the overall aircraft design as effectively as possible. When we're purpose-built electric, that's quite a bit different outer mold line or shape of the airplane as compared to a Cessna, which is built around the large internal combustion engine. A Predator UAV is built around the Rotax engine or the turbofan engine. The light carbon structure literally means the fuselage and the wings are measured in tens of pounds rather than hundreds of pounds. And of course, a vehicle needs, ultimately an aerospace vehicle, an airplane, you know, we need energy to lift. Energy required to maintain flight is lifting as well as propelling forward. So the lighter the structure, the lighter the airplane, the more the possibilities are for longer endurance flight and even perpetual flight. How many of us have read about the solar impulse? Solar impulse. Out of Europe, they've been flying a prototype. They flew across the United States, have made some relatively short hops. The second generation solar impulse just had its first flight, I think it was last week, if I remember right. Very, very long wing. Single pilot, top of the wings covered with solar cells, just like we're talking about. But the absolute key to the performance of the solar impulse and what they're hoping to do as adventurers, not as a practical airplane, they're trying to talk about what technology possibilities are and use this vehicle as a way to, you know, be casting the message. So it's not a practical airplane, but one of the things that Solar Impulse has done really, really well is lightweight structures. And they're risk takers. And I'll say that because when they were working on the second prototype, the structure of the wing was so light that in testing they broke it. It snapped. Now you can imagine, I'm going to be the pilot on that first airplane, and oops, the wing broke in testing. Doesn't exactly give you a power of confidence. And of course, they've worked really hard to make sure the door comes off quickly so you can bail out. Anyway, when you're advancing technology, however, when you're innovating, you have to be a risk taker. If you're not pushing the envelope, if you're not looking for what's not been possible up until now, you're not cutting new ground. So light-rate structures and aerodynamics are critical. It's not just motor technology. It's not just higher energy density lithium-ion batteries. New propellers. The controller and the electronics. Boy, that's really cool. But it's also pushing the envelope on advanced structures. Carbon fiber structures. And of course, the solar energy, we've got good friends right up here with Ascent Solar. Their thin film photovoltaics is breaking new ground and converting solar energy into electric. And you know what? When you're up there, that's free electricity. That's energy in the tank that I didn't have to carry aloft, that I didn't have to fill before I took off. How cool is that? Okay. So, unlike 2-3 years ago, as we've scaled up, the technology has also advanced in scale. So today, it's possible today to have these breakthroughs at small scale, 8 to 12 hours, at larger scale, flying throughout the entire day, and in the very near future, stratospheric aircraft fly very, very high, and at least the potential with the technology is perpetual flight. And if that possibility, that promise for the future can be realized, it's just stretching the imagination. I mean, just think of how many things can be done with a vehicle like that we're needing to do today on satellites, for example. And how expensive, even if it's a small satellite, how expensive that can be. We're downsizing the size of satellites. They're, shoebox size now, the very small satellites. But imagine that we didn't even need to do that anymore. that the operating costs on an hourly basis were under $10 an hour. And that's just a reserve financial account to replace batteries on occasion. That the electricity, the power to fly, was effectively free from the sun. And imagine that we weren't emitting any toxic fumes, that we weren't burning petroleum anymore to do this kind of flying, that we didn't have to launch a rocket to get there. It's amazing if you think about what the potential is. So, obviously it's a complex task. There's many things that have to be done to do it. Integrating the complete system is not trivial. Working together, of course, with customers. Many people have different ideas about what kind of payloads need to be in, and that's a major task all in and of itself. Unmanned systems can carry all kinds of things. And of course, you're not carrying a person, certainly not for that kind of endurance or flight persistence. You wouldn't want to. But by not having a human in the loop, by using auto flight controls, of course, we can save tremendous weight, and by reducing the amount of weight that we have to carry to altitude, that again translates into that persistent flight. Now from, well, just one more point here. From a defense perspective, I think most of the market now we're talking about is commercial. But from a defense perspective, it's also interesting if that's a market that's, you know, part of the potential utility of an unmanned system, that electric has some unique characteristics in the sense that there's very low, almost zero thermal signature. There's very low heat. There's not a lot of bright, hot exhaust. Very low heat. The propeller on an electric vehicle, an electric airplane, turns relatively slowly, and there's no exhaust noise from the engine running. So the acoustic signature is about 55 decibels, which is less than half the noise signature of even a small general aviation airplane. So for those that have heard unmanned systems like a Predator fly overhead, or even some of the smaller ones, a Puma or a Raven or something like that, it sounds like a lawnmower is flying overhead. You know, wow. And there's a very hot exhaust. They're easy to find and easy to hear, easy to locate. And of course, they can't fly, they can't stay aloft for very long, so you can kind of just check your watch and they're on their way. But imagine there was no heat signature. There was no noise signature. And they could stay and persist and listen and watch. Again, for those in the defense community or security or homeland defense, if it's Coast Guard, if it's search and rescue, if it's petroleum platform security, if it's cargo transport, whatever it might be, you can just imagine the possibilities. But again, that ultra-long endurance combined with the environmental benefits of no exhaust emissions, together with low thermal and low acoustic. Okay? So we think the potential is exciting, and effectively it's immediate. We'll be flying very, very soon, both with the technology demonstrator as well as with the aircraft as they are developed in the coming 6 to 8 months, 10 months. And we really think, again, most of the potential is in that commercial realm. Okay? We've seen UAV forecasts. This is one of the many popular ones from Forecast International. Of course, what's in this forecast, it looks very compelling, very interesting, but it doesn't include the possibility that wasn't even imagined when this forecast was put together, that the impact, the kind of impact we might have from a solar electric vehicle that could stay aloft perpetually. So this is exciting in and of itself, but imagine adding another layer or two on top of this. So the mission list, we'll try to kind of give some ideas about what they might include at medium altitudes. And of course, when you're not consuming oxygen in an internal combustion engine, we talk about high altitudes too. So let's look at medium altitudes. One of the things that's really concerning for us here in Colorado and in the western states is forest fires. Well, imagine if we had a perpetual infrared camera overhead the Rocky Mountains. And from medium to high altitudes, you can see large segments of the Front Range. Instead of waiting until a report came in from a isolated location, imagine having effectively an instantaneous infrared signature of a lightning strike and analyzing it as a fire with a multispectral camera and an infrared camera. Imagine being able to immediately respond to that campfire-sized issue rather than, you know, a major forest fire that had to be responded to with huge resources. So, you know, we look at somewhat conventional search and rescue, emergency response and things like that, but again, imagine the possibilities at altitude of an unmanned system providing protection for our natural resources right here in Colorado. Go ahead. And then high altitude, you know, we've seen Facebook and Google and others talk about, you know, communication and media, you know, not just here in the US, but around the world. Establishing a ground network and towers and so forth for cell towers or media or just internet is a tremendous expense, billions and billions and years. An airborne high-altitude antenna, if you will, that's linked with satellite, bringing to a region the ability to communicate where you don't need to set up those cell towers and that infrastructure, can be a tremendous tool for those in the world that today don't have connectivity, if you will. Now, typically on an unmanned system, on a UAV like a Predator, we have a sensor ball. The Westcam MX-15 is one example. You'll have 4 or 5 cameras of different types, from a high-definition color camera to infrared, multispectral. Sometimes there's a laser involved and things like that. But this is a typical example of what might be carried in a STRATOAIRNET UAV. It's integrated into the airplane, but of course what we're trying to do is get the information, the tool of the UAV is translating information gathered at altitude to somebody, of course, that needs to collect it on the ground, and you want that real time as much as possible. So this shows how that sensor system on the platform that we're creating is integrated into systems on the ground for the users. And of course, we begin to look at what the possibilities are for the future. All of the nanotechnologies, the miniaturization of the technologies benefiting us directly. Digital cameras and things, again, hyperspectral, multispectral allows agricultural research, mineral research. There's all kinds of benefits that can come when you can expand the possibilities of the data that's collected. So the airplane itself, we have that technology demonstrator that's coming out, followed by an optionally piloted airplane. Again, it's called the STRATOAIRNET. It is rather conventional in this configuration. As we take it into the production configuration, it gets a little bit more complex. But you can see, roughly it's a 1,000-pound airplane with solar on the wings, the electric motor, batteries, and so forth. And we'll show you a little bit, some pictures of that. So this is a structural analysis. This allows this technology for structural analysis called finite element analysis allows us to make that structure as absolutely light as possible by ensuring that we have the structure only where we need it, where the stress points are, and not where it's not needed. So technology benefits the design engineering as well as the material used for the fuselage. And of course, aerodynamics aren't just done in the wind tunnel anymore, they're done virtually. Computational fluid dynamic analysis allows us to do virtual wind tunnel testing. And it really allows us to fine-tune the aerodynamics as well as the loads on the airplane. So again, technology allowing us to really refine this aircraft even before it flies. When we spoke last, we were at about 160 watt-hours per kilogram in terms of battery energy density. Today, we're at 250 watt-hours per kilogram. By the time we go into production, we expect to be at 400 watt-hours per kilogram. This is an image of the battery pack being assembled. You can see the cells being assembled together in units, the battery management system, which allows the monitoring of the temperature and the voltage and the charge and so forth, and then of course the finished box. 4 boxes, 4 battery packs per aircraft. The electric motor, very, very powerful, very energy dense. And you notice behind the motor is a small box. When we were doing the electric Cessna project, that box, the controller, was as big and as heavy as the motor. Now the box is all digital, and you can see it's not much bigger than a couple decks of cards, and it weighs about 10 ounces. Just real quick.
10 ounces or 10 kilograms?
No, the motor is 10 kilograms. The controller is about 10 ounces. Literally a couple of digital decks inside there. Motor weighs about 9 kilograms. Next slide. And here you can see the wing being assembled. So what we're doing is certainly advancing the culture of aviation from a manned and unmanned system, but clearly we think we're cutting edge as well with a practical solution. And of course, by being relatively small and lean, we have an advantage over perhaps a Boeing or an Airbus or someone like that that would otherwise perhaps have more resources than we would have, but by their very nature, the bureaucracy would be relatively slow to integrating and putting an aircraft in flight. I love this slide, but rather than spending a lot of time in the details here, you can kind of see where, again, that light, lean organization would have an advantage over a larger organization like a major OEM. So as I mentioned, there are others that are doing this. You see the Solar Impulse over on the right-hand side. You have a typical Predator aircraft. There's a Global Hawk, which is a very large unmanned system, much larger, about twice the size of a Predator. And then there's the Solera 50. And the Solera 50 prototype, the 10-meter wingspan prototype there you see is the one that Facebook and Google were kind of, negotiating for in the media. I don't know if they were negotiating in business conference rooms, but they were certainly negotiating in the media. We are quite a bit smaller, but conventionally configured as opposed to STRATOAIRNET as compared to the Solera 50. You can see they have a very fragile, very light, thin approach to the air vehicle. One of the distinctives that we have, I think, is an extraordinary team. And some of them are here tonight. We're very grateful for that. But I think in terms of bringing to market a new technology, it's really cool to have something that's advanced, but you've got to have the substance and the depth to help make it realized. And so as a business, our strategy certainly is, you know, advancing the cause and advancing the technology, but we're doing it with an experienced team. Because it's not going to matter if you just talk about it. You got to have hardware, and you have to have something that you can bring to market. You have to have something, a need that gets answered, and a market that's willing to pay for that need. So we're organized not just for research, which is cool. We're organized as a business to bring to market this tool, whether it's unmanned or manned. We've kind of spoke to our experience in the past, but certainly it's significant in design and development. The smaller Silent Falcon that I mentioned here as I began the discussion is in low-rate initial production. So that 13-foot wingspan, 25-pound small solar electric aircraft is now beginning to get commercialized. So we're very excited about that. Very cool. And as I mentioned, in the weeks ahead, you'll also hear from us a little bit about a manned version of the technology demonstrator. If you kind of take the core technology, follow it to an unmanned system, that's STRATOAIRNET. If you follow it the other way, it's a manned aircraft. And in the weeks and months ahead, we'll be talking about this a little bit more. But just to kind of let you know it's coming. It's not just about unmanned systems. Of course, it's about carrying people aloft. And if you can imagine, again, you know, what matters to us as a nation, as a culture, as an industry, transportation industry segment, when you can carry people, that brings, again, another transportation realm that's interesting and important. If you can imagine a Tesla with wings and carry that into what the future might hold, that's also exciting. And this will be the first entree into that. So we think we have a very exciting company and team. The technology from multiple segments is coming together and being synthesized and realized into a technology demonstrator that will be flying very, very soon. And then we'll be going on into that unmanned STRATOAIRNET with various payloads with perpetual flight for the first time really in the realm of the possible in the near term. And of course, on the other branch of the tree, there's the manned system that we'll be introducing in the weeks ahead. Thank you. That's the presentation tonight. I'd be delighted to talk a little bit more if you have some questions. And I'll. The question was time to climb, and what are some of the expectations? Again, from a time to climb perspective, you know, we think in terms of a Cessna 172 perhaps flying and climbing in, you know, 750, 800 feet per minute. And in the optionally piloted configuration, this aircraft would climb at about the 700 feet per minute rate of climb. So it would be pretty similar to what you might expect a conventional general aviation airplane. What's more interesting, though, is how much energy does it take to sustain flight? About 6 kilowatts of energy to fly 50 knots, for example. And that is the extraordinary combination of aerodynamics, light structure, and very streamlined fuselage. That's where it really gets exciting. Because if you can balance the energy of what you're collecting from solar during the day, store it for nighttime flight, together with, as I was mentioning earlier, the little bit of the trading potential energy during the night for drift down, as well as slowing down. Again, for those of us with a little bit of physics and engineering, you know, drag is proportional to v squared. So if you fly slow, your drag goes way down, and what you have to overcome with thrust goes way down. So slow down during nighttime operations when you want to conserve that energy. So balancing solar collection with nighttime ops and potential energy and so forth, that's the key.
What about the cold performance of batteries?
Great question. You know, it comes up a lot. People say, well, you know, lithium batteries or batteries in general don't perform very well in cold temperatures. Well, you know, that's important only when you start on the ground, because as power is consumed, there's a thermal element with the batteries themselves as well as the electric motor. 95% efficient, but the other 5% is heat. So if you're properly containing the thermal in the motor and battery compartment, once it's in operation, again in that cycle, that heat is self-sustaining, is helping protect the full potential of the batteries. And of course, if you have a cold start, it's -50 in Minnesota or Alaska, you want to have those battery packs, of course, kept in the warm shed, and bring them out and plug them into your bit check, and you're on your way. The question had to do with other types of batteries beyond the lithium systems, and certainly there are tremendous opportunities with other battery storage systems. And we are looking at those. One of the things that we're looking at is a fuel cell technology to get to altitude. And then, of course, that fuel is consumed in the climb to altitude and no longer needed. So you've kind of traded the weight and energy to do the climb to altitude. And then you're sustained from that point on in the perpetual loop. But yes, of course, what we're doing is we're creating a configuration that's accepting of these types of technologies because we're using electric propulsion.
But do you think lithium is going to get to 400?
There's technology in the lab today in production configuration that's 400 watt-hours per kilogram. Now, there's other technologies that are talking about that and more. And of course, in time, how cool is that? That's great. But today, you know, near term, what we're going to fly with and what we're looking to go into production with, we'll start with that anyway. Yes, sir. The question had to do with how are we comparing, you know, with an electric system, propulsion system, as compared to a conventional fossil fuel system. And where's kind of the tipping point with efficiency and so forth as compared to a fossil fuel? Well, clearly fossil fuels are very energy dense, but there's lots of problems with them, as we all know. This audience is well familiar with those challenges. We think with today's technology, the technology demonstrator is the correct solution with that kind of 250 watt-hours per kilogram. The electric motor density in the thin film photovoltaics at 23 to 25% conversion efficiency. Our predicted production aircraft, in our view, has achieved the tipping point. And that's taking us to 30% solar conversion efficiency with a thin film PV. That's taking us to the 400 watt-hours per kilogram with the energy density of the batteries. We believe in the collection, that is the tipping point. And when you can talk about collecting energy, solar energy, and there's other energy that's solar aloft as well. And maybe another time we'll talk about that. I know we've got to watch our time. But when you can talk about perpetual flight, when you're no longer having the logistics and the requirement for fossil fuel consumption at all, we really believe that is a tipping point. And that, of course, realizes the potential of so many other applications that maybe haven't even been imagined today. So I think the time is now for technology demonstration, and in the very near future, we can project the lines of where that technology is taking us, in our view, to that tipping point. Yes, sir. How am I doing on time, by the way? Well, last question? Last question.
How many passengers does your airplane generate?
Well, of course, the unmanned system is 0, right? It's the you know, it's the autopilot passenger pilot person thing. We're starting with, on the conventional manned aircraft, a two-person. Now, the technology demonstrator, of course, is going to have a single pilot. So you'll be seeing that literally within weeks here. But we're not starting with auto flight. We don't want to, you know, there's so many issues with the FAA and airspace. You know, there's so many important things we can do today. We don't need to wrestle with the FAA with airspace right now. Let's show the technology. Let's get excited about its potential. Let's look at applications and talk to customers. That's what's immediately in front of us. But that will lead to an unmanned system on the one hand, and initially a two-seater on the manned side. Now, can we add passengers as those technologies mature? You bet we can. But that comes later. That comes later. Maybe not too far down the road.
Do you have an investor package?
Well, actually, the gentleman right to your right could talk to you about that. Yeah, we can do that. It's been a delight, everybody. Thank you so much.